Welcome to what I can really only describe as the largest collection of bass DIs ever assembled for a YouTube video shootout. This video is split up into 4 sections. We're going to get to music right away. I'm going to give you sound examples of every single DI in the lineup, just to give you an idea of what the DI sounds like. Really important to make that distinction between what a DI is and what a preamp with a DI is. We're going to get to that a little later. Use the timestamps to skip back and forth to get your reference points. Then of course I'm going to give you everything completely clean. No drums, no band, no nothing, just straight out the middle, shorter examples of each DI. Then I was super fortunate to get some close friends, some incredible musicians, bass players, sound engineers, people you all know and love on the phone. There are some really interesting takes from all of those people on what it means to use a DI, to use a preamp. Then I'm going to get into all of the DIs that have a preamp section, that have knobs to turn. I'm going to dial in a sound on all of those pedals just to give you a quick insight as to what you might be able to do with some of these units. Then at the end of the video, although there's no winner, there's no loser of this shootout. There are only options, there are only choices, and everyone's choice is going to be slightly different. There is one unit out of these 20 that I've managed to assemble that I'm actually going to put on my live touring pedal board. It just blew me away. Stick around to the end of the video to find out which one that is. Now, it's very important to highlight the fact that I owned a lot of these pedals, but a lot of them I didn't. A lot of these amazing pieces that you're about to see were not in my collection at all. I have to give so much thanks and gratitude to all of the builders, to all of the companies that when I reached out and said, hey, would you be interested in being a part of this project, of this video, of this shootout, the support for the project was just unbelievably positive. So I'm eternally grateful for everyone who just said, yes, hey, how can we get it to you? Let's get it to you quick and let's see what you do with it. Just the enthusiasm was amazing. And I got to give a special shout out to Perfect Circuit. They're my local store here in Los Angeles, up in Burbank. It's an actual store. You can walk through doors and you can walk in and you can see pedals like this. They have amazing inventory. They have people who really know what they're talking about. That's where I go to get stuff. That's where I go to test stuff out. They ship worldwide, so no matter where you are in the world, you can take advantage of them as well. They were kind enough to loan me 3 of the pedals for this shoot. So in return, of course, I want to support them, give them a shout out, encourage you to go check them out. I'm not getting paid by anyone to do this. This was all my idea. This is all on my time, on my dime. Any of the links I put in the description of the video are not affiliate links. I don't get any kickbacks for this at all. So with that being said, let's get to the musical examples. Let's get to every single DI in the lineup. Bass and drums, bass, drums, and band. And then I'll give you everything completely raw. Okay, so which one jumped out at you? Was there a lane? Did you like the passive things more than the active things? Did you like the totally clean DIs versus things that have a tube in them? I want to hear from you in the comments. Let me know what your initial impression is just from hearing those short clips. And now I'm going to give you all of those DIs completely clean, just a short clip of each DI totally on its own. I think it's really important to hear from a variety of bass players, from a variety of backgrounds. I'm really happy that I was able to get on the phone with my good friend John Davis. He owns the Bunker Studio in New York, one of the best and busiest recording studios out there. He also plays all over the world as a bass player, most notably over the past decade with Jojo Mayer and Nerve. Plays huge rooms, makes big sounds, really knows what he's talking about when it comes to the bass, when it comes to recording, when it comes to signal chain. Here's what he had to say about DIs. Hey B,
what's going on?
You own the Bunker Studios, which is one side of your bass world and recording world, and you also tour all around the world, most notably with Jojo Mayer and Nerve for the past few years.
Yep.
What are your thoughts / requirements when it comes to a DI or a preamp specifically for a bass player in either of those settings?
Well, I think actually it's a good, it's a very important distinction that you made there of the difference between a preamp and a DI.
Right.
And I think that there's a lot of stuff out there right now that kind of blurs that distinction. And that was kind of like when you mentioned this, that was one of those things I wanted to like really briefly, give you one of my typical like grumpy engineer rants.
Great.
About how like a Noble is not a DI. It's
Okay.
a preamp with a DI in it. A really good DI doesn't need or doesn't have tone shaping, which doesn't mean you can't add that. But it's kind of like a lot of these boxes are putting like a nice sounding preamp or line amp in a box with a nice sounding DI. And on paper, that's all well and good. And I think there's a lot of situations where that is the best option for a lot of people. But I think that in the context of like recording at home or recording in, kind of project studios that don't have a great console or great preamps, then having a sort of all-in-one preamp / line amp with a DI XLR out is a really good option, because then like you're delivering a pretty great signal, and you don't have to really risk someone messing up your bass sound. One thing that can get tricky is that like with any audio, the more active circuits you run it through, you are going to introduce a little bit more noise, a little bit more distortion,
Sure.
A little bit more color. And the more that you front load your signal chain with that, you are also kind of like forcing the hand down the road. It's one of the reasons that I don't really like compressor pedals in signal chains.
Okay.
Is because once it's compressed, you can never uncompress it.
Sure.
I guess I would say that it's important to just sort of tread with caution in those situations. And maybe it's also just being open to not always using the DI that you packed. It's good to be prepared, but then it's like, for instance, my favorite DI right now that I have at the studio is this thing that a local tech made, which is an old RCA transformer from like the 40s, just like screwed onto a metal box with a couple of jacks on it, and it sounds so good, like that into the Neve.
Yeah.
So it's like, it probably wouldn't sound very good into a Mackie or into a Universal Audio Apollo or something. So it's sort of, it has to be taken with a grain of salt, because a passive DI, you're really dependent on the preamp that you're running it into. So maybe you'll be in a situation in a studio where there's like, an engineer who has a great passive DI and a great console and a vintage LA2A. And it's like, hey, like maybe bypass the EQ and the compressor in your pedal board, and let's go into the real stuff.
Right.
Sometimes that's not the move.
So then I'm literally sitting here holding a Radial JDI.
Yep.
Where does that rank on your list of options and sort of utility and usefulness?
I think we have 8 JDIs here and maybe another 6 of the Pro DIs. So I would say that those are like some of the most useful, most solid passive DIs out there.
Gotcha.
But again, being a passive DI, it's very dependent on the preamp it's going into.
Yep.
So into a Neve, it sounds great.
Yeah.
It's really good. I mean, and live, if you have a good engineer, then it's also great. I have a Radial Jensen Transformer DI in my pedal board with Nerve, because I trust Aaron to get a good sound at front of house using that. So it's like, I don't really need to, and I'm coloring the sound, as so much with so much crap anyway.
Right.
That it's like, I don't really need like a nice DI bass tone so much as a really efficient way to get the signal into the front of house. I see passive DIs as just no fuss, high quality, but not flattering. I guess the flip side of that is you don't really have a chance to to develop a sound around it.
Sure.
Whereas like with something like the Noble, you know, you could really lean on that and create a voice with it, where it's sort of like, this is my sound, like this EQ, you know, this gain, this tube gain.
We've done it on a record
sort of
together before. We did that in 2019. I think I used the Noble on the Union, you know. I first started using it with you like back in 2012 or 2014 or something, way back then.
Right.
But yeah, we've definitely used that in the studio, and that's amazing information. I think people will learn a lot from it.
Cool.
You're the man. Thanks, dude.
Thanks, dude. I'll talk to you later.
All right, man. Later. So one of the people kind enough to send out one of their pedals to include in the video was Jad Freer, their capo. And of course, I have the Noble since many years. It's serial number 9. I was one of the very first adopters in the bass world to use this device. And I know someone who happens to have a Jad Freer on one board and a Noble Preamp DI on another. That is my buddy Ian Martin Allison. I managed to get him on the phone. This is what he had to say about these two devices.
Hello.
Ian Martin Allison.
What's going on, Janek Gwizdala?
So I'm sitting here with two pieces of gear that you are pretty well known for using, the Jad Freer Capo and the Noble. I know they sit on two different rigs of yours. You want to tell me what kind of stands out about those two pieces and what you kind of require in general to feel the most comfortable from a DI/preamp?
Okay, yes. So the Noble, long time. I think you were a super early adopter. I got in maybe a little bit after you. I have never found a DI that I've liked better, to be honest. To me, it's a big, wide, clean platform with so much headroom. You can't distort it.
Right.
I think people sometimes wonder, you know, they think, oh, maybe it's like an amp in a box. But it is not. It's like a hi-fi tube preamp with zero dirt. I like the simplicity. I'd be lying if I said that the aesthetic didn't matter to me. It does. I think it's one of the most beautiful DIs ever made. I like that it's a problem solver too. I love that that it has some power to power, some simple 9-volt pedals, sort of the heart of the pedal board.
Right.
And the only reason I moved away from it was for some size issues.
Yep.
For travel, which would lead me to the Jad Freer Capo DI, which I got to put on a small travel board, but quickly discovered that it was almost sort of like a boutique Sans amp in terms of it can grind.
Yeah.
It can be very clean and lovely hi-fi, Noble-esque, but then it can also really grind. And so I have found that it's a great size for traveling. Also, there's no tubes that I'm worried about on the road, right? Sure. It's all solid state. And even also in the studio, I've noticed if I'm trying to hit some kind of tone targets, maybe an interesting mid-range character of a distorted sound, it's really excellent for hitting targets in that way.
So for really dialing in a specific mid-frequency or something?
Yes, okay. Yes. Specifically getting something kind of like characterful out of like drive and mid-range, which I'm asked to do sometimes. So it's really excellent for that. The EQ is killer. The dirt options are killer.
So that brings up kind of a cool thing about mid-range in a lot of these units I've been trying. Do you prefer that sweepable mid thing, or are you a fan of these pedals that have kind of a notch where there are two pre-selected frequencies? Do you have a thought either way on those?
I guess if I have, what I actually prefer in my heart of hearts is nothing. Gotcha. I don't want any knobs. I feel like when there are knobs, I think about it and I think I'm supposed to move them.
Yeah.
I actually prefer a very simple circuit, but when I have that sweepable mid-range, I find that I use that maybe more than I would use the low mid, knob and the high mid knob.
Sure.
Or just a mid knob.
Yeah.
Especially with dirt, if I'm doing something, a dirty P-bass thing, for instance, like with a pick,
yeah.
Then I'm finding I'm trying to dig into that mid-range and find something that's kind of interesting to maybe accentuate a little bit, to boost a touch. But I'm not doing it often, but I like the parametric option for that.
Very cool. All right, dude, really appreciate your time, man. Thank you for chiming in.
Absolutely,
and I'll see you soon.
Likewise.
All right, buddy.
Okay, take
See
care.
ya. Bye. Now, what did you think about the Radial, the JDI, the Jensen Transformer, the passive direct box when you heard it in the lineup? Did it sound okay? Was it underwhelming? Or was it a case of, oh, wow, it's a passive DI, has no EQ, nothing really going on it, but it actually sounds like a P-bass? I think it's really important to get the perspective of a non-bass playing recording engineer. This is my great friend, my musical collaborator since many years, Juan Pablo Alcaro. He's worked on my last 2 records. He mixed my first record 20 years ago, Mystery to Me. We've been working in the studio together most of our adult lives, and he had some interesting things to say that included talking about the Radial JDI. Managed to get him on the phone all the way from Argentina earlier on today. Check out the conversation.
Hello?
Mi hermano.
Sí, estoy.
Okay, so I'm sitting here surrounded by bass DIs.
Okay.
We've done a ton of projects together. We've used all kinds of different things. When you are in the studio and a bass player walks in, do you have a preference for what they walk in with? Do you even care? And if you do care, what would you prefer? What would you prefer to see?
In terms of gear besides the bass?
Yeah, like the DI, specifically the DI, and whether that has a preamp or, what kind of transformer, all of those things.
Honestly, I would like to use my stuff. I would like to use whatever is in the studio available.
Okay.
I'm an old school dude. For me, there's 2 things: or passive, like a transformer-based DI, like a Jensen sort of transformer thing, or an active circuit thing, like a Countryman.
Yeah.
There are plenty of models based on that topology, like, for example, tape boxes from Canada. Radial does like a contemporary thing of the classic passive Jensen thing, or the
literally holding one in my hand right now and holding it up to the camera, the Jensen JDI by Radial.
Like the green one.
The green one, exactly.
Give me that shit and give me like whatever's in the studio. Like I plug you into like a 1073, maybe an EQ a little bit with that, or with a Pultec, and then I don't know, like a Tube Tech compressor, or like a LA2A, and that's gonna be it.
In your opinion and in your experience, have you ever found that a really fancy DI or preamp combination thing can actually like help a shittier sounding bass?
Yes or no? Actually, no. No, if the bass sounds like shit, no.
Cool.
It's a color thing. You're gonna get like a patina, like a different color of something, but it's not gonna be magic. It's not like gonna be like suddenly you're gonna play better, or suddenly your bass is gonna sound like a decent sounding bass.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
All right, you're the man. I appreciate it.
No, please, my man, for sure.
Someone else I was able to get on the phone for this video that I'm super happy to be able to share the conversation with you all was Sean Hurley, great friend of mine, incredible bass player. He's been on hundreds, if not thousands of records. I'm sure you know his playing. If you don't know his playing, you've absolutely heard it. If you've heard any music in the past 3 decades, he's probably most known live for playing with John Mayer as well as recording with John. He's a massive fan, long-time user of the Noble. He has 2 of them, in fact. And I got him on the phone a little while ago. This is what he had to say about DIs, about the Noble, and about signal chain in general.
Good afternoon.
My friend, how are you doing?
I'm pretty good. How are you?
I'm making this crazy video about DIs.
I saw all the pictures, man.
Oh my
Crazy.
word. Yeah, it's insane. And you are so known for doing so many different things. I know people know you quite a bit for the Noble as a DI. A couple of questions. Is that still your go-to thing? And I
yes, I've tried out a bunch in the meantime, like probably, guys, it's been nearly 7 years since I got one.
Right.
But I've always gone back. Once the producers I've worked with have gotten hooked on the Noble, anytime I've been, hey, I check this out, check that out. They're always like, I think they're used to it and it sounds great. So it has not left the number 1 and number 2 spot, because I've got one under my desk at home and one for the case to hit the road.
Nice. So it's a live thing as well? You use that with John and whoever else you're on the road with?
Yeah, I never ended up using it with John other than recording, because I didn't get it until after Pino took over the live stuff.
Okay.
But I've used it with Adina and Squeeze and whoever I have played a live gig with since 2017. I think I had the main one I use in the studio probably in 2016. And I kept seeing dudes have them live, and I was like, man, I guess I got to have one live. So I bought a second one.
Nice.
And that one has been, so, and to never be without it. And you know how easy it is with the 9-volt power. It's like, it's an easy thing to add to a pedal board, provided that you actually have one.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess the thing is then, like, that's a really strong case for it's not just drinking the Kool-Aid. It's actually made a difference to your bass playing life since you had it.
Yeah. And I tried it out in the studio. I really challenged Jack.
Okay.
I said, well, you're coming to town for the NAMM show. This is like 2016. I'd been seeing a bunch of guys putting pictures up, and I was having issues because I was stuck on the Evil Twin, and I had 2 of those. Not for live, but just so that I'd never be without one. Yeah. And I was hooked on it, but at certain studios, my studio, my friend Zach Ray's studio, because you plug it in, it would, if the power wasn't pristine, I would get a little buzz, which was unacceptable. So Jack came to town, and I was like, look, if your DI sounds good and is also quiet at my studio in Hollywood, I'll be sold. And sure enough, it was, but I happened to be in the studio. My engineer partner was there. And what we noticed was that it made my amp sound more desirable. Like, we were going, wait a minute. You know, usually you just do it because it's easy. Yeah. Go into the DI, out of the DI, into the amp. And we were like, wait a minute. I think we like the B15 sound better with the DI. So it was easy. It was quiet. And it has made my life not infinitely, but quite a bit easier to just navigate whatever room, whatever situation. Sure. It's taking care of things.
And because you find yourself at like some of the greatest studios in LA, the greatest studios in the world, working with, I'm pretty sure, some of the greatest engineers on earth, do you find that you're still using things like an LA2A and a 1076 and putting other things after the Noble in the chain when you record?
Usually, it all depends on how far, like what the flavor of these engineers are, because this is where I get a little bit frustrated with bass players or any musician that talks about themselves as if they're the end user. Like, we're just a piece of the thing. Now, when you're at home and alone, it's all your choices, but it tends to not be your only choice, especially if you're involving engineers and mixers and producers. So if I'm at Henson, if I'm at, East West, if I'm at Sunset Sound, I'm going to leave it up to them to put me into something. And then I usually ask when I have a moment, hey, what did you have me running through? And it tends to be, if they've got a Neve open, whether it's a 1081 or 1073, they'll put me in there. They'll put me into an API. If it, whatever's available, they'll tend to put me into, because that's something that they can adjust gain and, the structure of the gain structure. Now, what I have found, it's probably particular to me, my instruments, because it was happening even with the Evil Twin. A lot of guys don't use a compressor on me because they don't feel they need to, and they know they'll probably engage one in mixing. So they're like, you play even, so they don't use it as a corrective measure. Sometimes we do just for sonically. Right. It does a puffiness thing and whatever. But with Mayer, his guy Chad, when we made Born and Raised, he went 1073 and no compression. So just, that was an Evil Twin back then, but it was just tube DI and pre, and that was it.
So no printed compression on the bass channel until the overall mix.
Yeah, that was awesome. His particular choice. Now, some guy, like a lot of guys, I know John Shanks and some other dudes, they'll use a DBX 160 because they like what that does. I always like it when an engineer makes a tonal choice, because if your hands are in control, it's like, well, you don't need it to tamp things down, but maybe you want it to tonally sit in a place that only a compressor can squeeze it into a certain area in between the kick and snare.
Totally.
Like a color choice.
Amazing. Dude, I can't thank you enough for the insight. I think people are going to get a lot out of that. Okay, let's get to what is arguably the most fun part of any of this stuff. That's turning knobs, that's making sounds, that's discovering things you perhaps hadn't heard before. We're going to go first with the Microtubes X Ultra from Darkglass. It's kind of a sleeper on the list in terms of a DI. I was on the fence whether I should include it. It's really known as a distortion, as an overdrive. But then, as you heard in the examples earlier on, the clean DI was super clean. It was really, really responsive to my playing. And now, not only does it check that box, but when we engage some of this stuff, it's kind of no joke in the bass overdrive distortion zone. It has this huge parametric EQ, low pass, high pass filters. Really is pretty aggressive. Of course, I'm pushing it. I'm going for an aggressive sound here. Some of the features on it are that it has some compression. You can split the high level and the low level. You can give it more high grit without losing your low end, which I kind of really appreciate. If I get some maybe more extreme sounds going here, I'm going to really push the pedal. That's just a little peek inside what this pedal is capable of. You can, of course, disengage the distortion and just use the EQ. One thing I noticed through this whole process of using all of these pedals, the gain structure is really different from pedal to pedal. Obviously, a DI box is taking an unbalanced signal and turning it into a balanced signal, making it more usable for front of house, for recording, for all of those applications that we end up playing bass in. And one byproduct of that is that the line out, the actual signal you end up getting, is vastly different across the board with all of these pedals. As I plugged the Tech 21, the VT bass DI in, I was about to say to you on camera, hey, let's go with that classic Sans Amp sound. Now, I should be the first to admit that my knowledge of what is classic and what is not is fairly limited. I've learned a lot over the past couple of weeks using all of these devices, but I am by no means an aficionado on the history of distortion, of overdrive, of fuzz, of preamps, of all of these things. I'm kind of learning as I go. I'm sharing it with you as I go, and I like what I like. I'm dialing these sounds not to be generic, not to check a box, not to fit into, hey, I got the gig with the Foo Fighters, so I need that sound. That's not the purpose of these individual musical examples. This is exactly what I do with pedals when I get them. I start turning knobs and I look for music. That's exactly what I'm going to do with this. It is, to my ear, a bit of a classic sound, I must admit. I've heard rock things sound this rocking, and it has a bunch of options. Got some highs in there, maybe a few more highs than the Darkglass actually. If I kind of blend over, we're getting some fuzz as well, hiss rather, and that is a little aggressive. Maybe I back off the drive and the character a little bit. I do like the twang of the high end, but then you've got a kind of a difference between a fuzz sound and a distortion sound, which is nice. I'm using the bite button. Big fan of this. Here's without. Here's with. A little more twang in there. And I'm kind of using a J sound, a jazz bass sound. It's on the back pickups over here. I'm going to use that throughout all of these individual examples. And again, really not complex in terms of the controls. Basic EQ, the ability to blend back and forth between the dry sound. If I can take all of the drive out and then just introduce it. immediately I want to play it. That's always a sign of something that is useful, something that is musical. And unfortunately, this video will be 4 hours long if I don't move on to the next pedal. It looks like we're doing all of our drive sounds up front here. This is the Walrus Audio Badwater, and it has a similar set of controls to the Tech 21, but with a few more features. I do like this toggle switch here, 3-position toggle switch, which gives you 3 different voices, sort of low, mid, and high. In fact, if I take down the blend a little bit, and it's subtle. I like subtle. It also has a little compression option going on here with the sustain knob. So there are a few extra controls. Again, you can blend, get totally clean, and then introduce the fuzz as you need it. Why not just crank it here? Let's go in that mid notch. Maybe crank some highs. That's maybe not so usable, but as you can see, it's not that complicated to get into something approaching usable in terms of an overdrive, in terms of a rocked out sound. And again, that's always my approach with a new pedal. Plug everything in, turn everything up, start turning knobs until you find the music. It just makes me smile. That's a really good indicator as to whether something's working or not. If it makes me smile, if it makes me want to play it more, I just hear the sound, the natural sound of my own instrument that I know so well. I hear it coming out. I hear it enhanced. It's really important that you think about that if you're trying out a device like this. Make sure you know the sound of your instrument. Make sure you know what you like. And then you can decide, then you can judge. Is the thing you're plugging into, is it helping that? Is it enhancing those sounds? Is it making you go back to the instrument and smile every time you play it? You know, this Simone by Jule Amps, super high-end piece of gear. It's got tubes. It's got some options. We have some EQ. We definitely have some drive options here. You could crank the drive, maybe turn that DI output down a little bit. Oh, yeah, maybe a little hot there, but you can definitely make it break up. But at the same time, twiddle a couple of knobs and you're back to this beautifully almost saturated clean sound with some nice EQ options. You know, when I'm smiling this much, it's a joy to play something like that. Super thankful that Jule were able to send over this unit to include, to share with you in this shootout. It's the Jad Freer Capo. I first saw this on Ian Martin Allison's board when I was out in Minneapolis recently. I know Tim LaFave has a signature version of this. So just those 2 endorsements alone were enough to make me very curious about it. I reached out. They sent over this unit. I've been getting to know it for a couple of weeks. And that's kind of an overdriven sound. That's probably maybe not my go-to thing. But oh man, when you dial it back and you get to the clean sound of the instrument and there are all these extras, it's kind of a Swiss Army knife. There are so many things you can do with it, with parallel routing and feeding one side into another. It deserves its own video. I know there are tons of fantastic videos about this out there. I just want to share my short introduction to you with it, and twiddle knobs and make sounds. And let's hit that deep switch, shall we? Oh yeah, baby. Ooh, and it's got a bite switch. So many fun and most importantly musical things you can do with it. Maybe I'll boost the lows a bit, scoop the mid a touch, and it's got a beautiful, it just makes the jazz bass sound really nice. Maybe some So the Aguilar has become like such a workhorse for so many people I know. It's basically the same preamp that's in the Tone Hammer heads in their amp range. And it's one of those sort of Swiss Army knife things that you can do a bunch of stuff with. First and foremost, it's just a good sounding preamp and DI. I started off the setting I had it on was kind of thin. It didn't take much to get me right up to like, okay, I can walk on stage right now with this. And no shortage of power in there. It's really responsive. It feels like my bass. Nothing's leaping out and saying, oh, you need to get used to this. It's sort of an instant gratification of you plug in, you play, you know exactly what it's going to do. So the Miura K3 DI and preamp is one of those pedals. It's pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward. Sounds really nice, first of all. You know, it sounds like a jazz bass. We've got this totally easy to manipulate EQ. I can dial in my desired kind of jazz bass sound. I think it translates onto record very well. And it's another one that I've used both live and in the studio. And it's one I like because it has this extra button on it. It has an effects loop in it. So if you're someone like me who uses a ton of pedals and you want to split things up and have control of your clean sound, your through sound, I think pedals like this that have that feature are definitely worth considering. It sort of falls into the unobtainium category, not because it's $1 million to buy, but because they either don't make them anymore or they're in very limited supply. That's an unfortunate feature of some of the pedals on this list. Some of them, there's a wait list. Some of them, they're fabulously expensive. Some of them, they simply don't make them anymore. So that's definitely something you need to consider when you're getting into looking for the right DI and preamp for you. Okay, this is the Origin Effects bass rig, super vintage. This is an SVT. It's an Ampeg SVT in a pedal. It does that exceptionally well. It really is an SVT. Sounds like it. Feels like it. And for my money, it unfortunately for Ampeg beats out the SGT-DI as an SVT. Now, we're going to get to that in just a second because I think the SGT-DI has something worth the price of admission alone that has nothing to do with an SVT. The only note I have about this that I wasn't crazy about is that you cannot turn off the cab sim situation regardless of whether the pedal's engaged or not. I'm not sure why. I'm not sure what the concept behind that was. Maybe it's just, hey, we're making an SVT and that's it. This is what this thing does. Great. I would hate to expect something from a pedal that it was never designed to do. I just think as a feature, if you could turn the cab sim off, as great as the cab sim sounds, it would kind of make this pedal an absolute killer in so many different categories, not just the SVT category. But as an amp in a box, if ever you're on the road and you're uncertain about what you're getting and where you're going, the fact that you can have that massive refrigerator stack in a pedal this size, kind of priceless. It's not the cheapest pedal in the world, but compare it to humping an SVT around the world and it pays for itself in about the first 3 songs of the gig. So with the Ampeg SGT-DI, I still think obviously the Origin Effects wins out as the SVT. I don't think that's an opinion that's exclusive to me either. I've heard other people kind of share the same thoughts and feelings. But what this has up its sleeve, which I don't think enough people are giving it credit for, is the same thing that the new Venture amps by Ampeg have, which is this emulation, this cab sim in the head itself. They have an Ampeg vintage B15 emulator, which I think is worth the price of admission alone. I don't know what it is, but there's something about it when I play that B15 emulation. that makes me feel like I've just plugged into a B15. I think that's really hard to beat, especially when you can get it built in to the head of one of these amps. You don't even need to take the pedal on the road with you. Let's go with something really simple. I think it's one of the cheapest, it's one of the smallest form factor pedals on this entire list, and it packs a punch. It's a DI, it's a preamp, you have some tone shaping. I can give it a little boost in the low end, a little boost in the high. And really get to a nice sound for my jazz bass. And the whole range of the instrument sings as well. Really clear. That is, for me, one of the best bangs for the buck in the entire lineup when you factor in how big it is, what it weighs, the build quality, the functions. Don't forget it has an EQ, it has input and output controls, it has a mid-frequency selector, and it's a DI where you can bypass the preamp. That's a lot of bang for the buck, I think. Last one for this section, it's the Minnow from Trickfish. Some really pretty traditional controls. Something I dig about this are the pre-selected mid-frequencies, 333 and 473 in the low mids, and 1K and 1.8K in the high mids, and just being able to boost or scoop those, you can get to some really specific sounds right away, and there's that visual element to it. We're going to talk a little bit about the color box later on. This also has an EQ, but as you can see, it says bass, mid, and treble, but there are no indications of frequency on any of the knobs, although I happen to know the mid frequency is 1K and the top notch and the bass frequency is 120. I happen to know those things. I happen to understand a little bit about recording consoles, so I know how this works. But it's an amazing tool, I think, especially if you're kind of new to this, to have specific frequencies visually locked in two different notches, in the low mid and in the high mid, and be able to dial something really specific without having to guess. Even if you have a sweepable mid-range on a knob that has a massive sweep from left to right, from low to high, you're still kind of guessing at the exact frequency. And yes, the more advanced player, the more advanced engineer is going to know what all of those frequencies are, is going to be able to just hear and go, oh, I need to go here, and that's it. But if you really don't want to be thinking about that, if you want a faster path to getting a better sound, I love the features of the Minnow when it comes to the mid-range. And besides that, you can just dial really nice quick sounds. As you can hear throughout this entire video, I'm keeping some serious consistency with the quality of sound of my bass. At least it feels consistent, and it feels like it's a quality sound to my ears. Nothing's really jumping out and going, oh, I don't like that, that's unmanageable, or I can't get to a sound with that pedal. I'm really fortunate to be able to highlight pedals that really do a great job across the board. They have a foundation of great, and they go from great to incredible. So if you take away nothing else from this, just realize that everything I'm showing you right here has sounded good and can only get better from there. Basically, the only limitation, the only ceiling in how good this can get is your imagination at the end of the day. So let's wrap it up. Let's talk about value for money. Let's talk about bang for the buck. Two things that I think stand out from the crowd in terms of what they cost and what they do. And let's also take a quick look at the pieces I use, from the stuff I already own, from the stuff that came in that's new to me. Let's find out, although, like I said, there are no winners, there are no losers, there are only choices. Let's find out what choice I made. Which unit out of these 20 DIs/preamps am I choosing to put on my current touring pedal board and take to Asia on a massive tour in just 5 days' time? But first, bang for the buck. Two things stick out to me. These little guys, the Finally from Sushi Effects, their version 2, their With Bass in Mind edition, brand new version of their Tube DI. I think that in combination with something like an HX Stomp, if you have just this maybe on your travel board, on your fly date setup for pedals, you're running everything digital in here, why not throw something like the Finally, maybe after, maybe even before, as your DI that also has that beautiful tube in it that really warms up your sound, warms up your thing. Form factor, price, and the fact that there's a tube in there, don't think there's really anything else that kind of comes close to it on the market. I loved playing it. I loved having it in the Shootout, in the lineup. Really appreciate my buddy Phil Mann hooking it up and making it happen, and for Sushi Box for sending it out. This is going back, sadly. This is not mine to keep. It's a one-person operation. These need to be sold. People got to eat. I got to respect that, and just really appreciate being able to have it in my studio for a couple of weeks. And I think it's something you should consider if you want a tube on your board that's in a small form factor and can warm up something that's very digital like the HX Stomp. Non-tube, price, feature set, build quality, robustness has to go to the MXR Bass Preamp. I thought it sounded so clean, so pure. It made me feel happy. I heard my bass when I heard it. I think it might be the cheapest one on this entire Shootout, and it's tiny. This on your board really gets it done. Now, like both John Davis and Juan Pablo Alcaro, two experienced recording engineers, said, don't sleep on the Radial JDI or any kind of passive direct box or simple direct box that doesn't have any of the EQ and the fancy stuff and the tubes. I've got two of them here. I've got the JDI, I've got the Teletronix TDI. I use this all the time. It makes me smile. Yeah, not just because I'm serial number 5 and it's a Janek Gwizdala prototype. It makes me smile because I hear the exact sound of my bass when I use it. It's clean, it's quiet, it's a really simple go-to thing if I need some transparency in my sound. You're going to see Radial DIs on almost every stage and in almost every studio you walk into in the world. Whether you like it or not, you might actually have to use one of these at some point. So don't sleep on it in terms of what it might do for your everyday setup as a bass player. It was incredible to have the REDDI here from A Designs. My buddy Reggie Hamilton hooked it up. I got to borrow it for a couple of days. I sadly don't have it to hold in my hands while I'm talking to you at the end of this video, but it was immense. It is, again, something that's very simple. It's got a tube, it's got a transformer, it's got, I think, 16 dB of gain in it. That's it. But that's it is hardly it. It sounded amazing. It's up there in the top echelon of DIs. It's something I see in recording studios around the world more and more. I've done a bunch of records on the REDDI DI, although I don't own one. Like I said, it's just in the studio already. Studio owners know to have that piece of gear for bass players because it's so solid. Reggie uses it on tour live as well as in the studio. And I used one on a record as recently as last month when I was in New York doing a new Steve Smith Vital Information record. That's the one I've done the last 2 Vital Information records on. They're a total industry standard, and if you're serious about that side of things, about your tone, about recording, I think it's something you should definitely consider looking into. Now let's get to what I use in my studio. I have 2 BP1 compacts from Caveman Audio sitting right here. These are the DIs I use when I'm recording in stereo, when I'm recording a bunch of effects. They normally sit in the rack over here, and that's my permanent stereo setup. It's basically 2 Neve 1073s in pedal form. They are somewhat tourable. You can get this on a board. I have put this on a pedal board before, and when you compare it to the BP1, this is something I use if I'm just recording a single line and I want that 1073 sound. This is my other channel. I've got channels 3 and 4 for the stereo, channel 2 for the mono, but it's a bit on the large side in terms of traveling. When I want the tube thing, I have the Noble. Again, it's serial number 9. I'm one of the earliest adopters of using this on bass. I met Jack in Santa Cruz probably 12 years ago, and he gave me this, and I've been using it ever since. I've been using it for 12 years. He recently serviced it. I did a whole interview with him for my podcast. I'll link it in the description below. It's fascinating to hear about the story of how Noble came to be, and that's my go-to thing, much like Sean Hurley in the studio. But due to it being one of the earlier models with the tubes and the power supply on the outside, it's not the most tourable thing. I do have a flight case for it, much like Reggie Hamilton has a flight case for his REDDI DI.
I'll close it. You want to close it? Yeah. All right, mind your fingers. There you go.
So for me, this one rarely ever leaves the studio. And let's get to it. Let's get to the one, again, not winner, not loser. Let's get to the choice, the main choice, the thing that I'm choosing to take on the road to add to my pedal board and leave for Asia in just 5 days. It's the JHS Colour Box. It's the one I've talked the least about in this video. Maybe that gave it away that this one was going to be my choice to go on the board. It's something I'd never used before. It's something I'd been incredibly curious about for some time. It's essentially a mixing console. There's a reason there's a picture of a mixing console on there. I'm in love with the EQ. I like the concept of a mixing console EQ. I love to be able to manipulate my sound that way. Takes a little more work, takes a little more research and study and knowledge as to how all of that works, but it does a ton of things. You have these gain stages that are notched on the step knob. You have this kind of pre-volume, master volume. You can crunch the hell out of it if you want overdriven and distorted sounds. I think the EQ, again, is so musical. It's something I look forward to moving from venue to venue with and being able to adjust my sound to get it exactly the way I want to hear it. No more guessing. No more just trusting whoever might be working with you that night. I'm actually going to be able to send exactly what I want to the front of house and exactly what I want to the monitors, and just give myself a much better chance of success when it comes to having that great sound that I love about my instrument on stage and everywhere I am in the world. If you'd have told me 2 weeks ago this would be the thing I was picking, I'd have said no way. I'd have said it was way too complicated. I'd have said there's no way I had time to get into it. I'd have said, it's probably not for me. It's more of a studio piece. I could not have been proved more wrong. And the moral of this whole project of putting this epic video together about bass DIs and preamps for you all has been to stay open-minded, to not prejudge anything, and to just go in search of music. When you're in search of music, rather than searching for something that you think might fix your sound or make you play better, when you're in search of music, you're going to look in the right places. I've looked in 20 different right places for this project. I'm absolutely fucking exhausted. This currently is the biggest DI shootout for bass players that's ever been uploaded to YouTube. I hope someone else does the next one. I hope it's bigger. I hope it's twice as big. I'll gladly sit there and watch it. I don't think I'll be the one making it, but I really appreciate you spending some of your insanely precious time with me, talking about music, learning about the bass, getting nerdy about pedals, and I hope you leave here knowing a little more than you did before you started. I'm Janek Gwizdala, and I'll see you again on the next video.